The first snowfall of the season came early that year, cloaking the mountains in thick white silence that mirrored the one Hallie had carried inside her for 3 long, aching years. The town of Elkridge was nestled so deep in the valley that most outsiders never found it unless they were either lost or running from something. Hallie had been both. She arrived on a Wednesday, back when autumn still clung to the trees, her hair tangled, her eyes empty, her voice locked somewhere so deep inside her chest that even she wasn't sure it would ever surface again. She took a room above the old bookstore at the corner of Alder and 6th, accepted the quiet company of ink and pages, and never once opened her mouth. At first, people tried. Friendly customers would ask her name, offer pleasantries, attempt to draw her into conversation. But as weeks bled into months and months into years, they learned to stop asking. She communicated in written notes, in subtle glances, in the smallest, softest smiles. She became a fixture, the quiet girl in the bookshop. No one knew she was a wolf. No one knew she had once howled so loudly it split the skies. Now she refused even to shift. She hadn't in 3 years. Not since that night. Not since Betrayal carved out her trust with a silver knife and left her bleeding under a full moon. Hallie no longer believed in mates. No longer believed in voices or promises or vows whispered in the dark. She believed in silence. She believed in surviving. Until the night she heard the convoy. Black SUVs slicing through the snowy road like knives, windows tinted, tires crunching over ice as a ripple of unease swept through the town. Something ancient stirred in Hallie's chest as she watched them from the upstairs window, breath fogging the glass. Something her silence couldn't smother. The arrival of Adriana Blackhill was more than just an event, it was a shift in gravity. The Alpha Queen of the Northern Territories was a legend, a name whispered in reverence and awe, known for uniting fractured packs and for a presence so commanding it could still a riot with a single look. And now she was here, in this town, for a summit with other alphas, yes, but also, some said, for another reason. The Queen had never claimed a mate. And, at her age, that was more than unusual. It was unheard of. Hallie stayed away from the center of town, as she always did when things got loud. But that night, something pulled at her. Not in her mind, but in her bones. In her wolf. She hadn't shifted in 3 years, but as the full moon rose above the treetops, silver and merciless, something ancient inside her stirred. So she ran. Not in wolf form, no. Just as herself. Boots crunching over snow, breath heaving, heart pounding in a rhythm she hadn't felt since before the betrayal. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to be among the trees. Needed to get away from the sudden presence that made her chest tight and her blood race. But the forest was not empty that night. Adriana walked alone among the pines, drawn by a whisper she couldn't explain. Her guards had protested. Alpha Queens did not wander off alone, but she silenced them with a look. There was something out there. She felt it. Not danger. Not exactly. But something calling. The moment happened quickly, and yet stretched into eternity. Adriana was standing near a stream, hands buried in her coat pockets, when she heard it, a sound so low, so mournful, so raw that it stole the breath from her lungs. A howl. Not loud, not proud, but fractured, hurt. It wasn't even a full shift howl. It was something between human and wolf, like a voice buried under rubble finally clawing its way out. And it echoed through the trees with a desperation that made Adriana's throat close. She turned, heart racing, blood thundering. And in the distance, she saw movement, a silhouette half hidden by trees, then gone. The next morning, she sent her guards to comb the forest. I heard a she-wolf, she told them, eyes hard. Find her. But they returned with nothing. No tracks. No sense. Nothing but snow and shadow. That same morning, Adriana stepped into the bookstore, wrapped in charcoal wool and authority. Hallie looked up from behind the counter. Their eyes met. For just a second, the air seemed to pause. Adriana didn't know why her stomach flipped. She didn't know why her wolf whispered her. And Hallie, Hallie had never hated her own heartbeat more than in that moment, because it betrayed her. It reacted. The queen stepped forward, running a gloved hand over a hard cover. "Beautiful place," she said, her voice smooth as smoke. Hallie gave a polite nod. No words. No expression. Just practice neutrality. Adriana's gaze lingered. "I'm looking for something rare. Something difficult to find." Hallie tilted her head and handed her a notepad and pen, her usual method. Adriana blinked. "You don't speak?" A small shrug. A quiet smile. The queen wrote something on the paper. "Do you understand wolves?" Hallie stared at the words. And for the first time in years, her fingers trembled as she wrote back. "More than I wish I did." Adriana smiled. "Then we'll get along just fine." The queen returned the next day. And the next. Always at different times, never announcing herself, always alone. Each time she stepped through the door, Hallie's lungs caught fire in her chest. She told herself it was coincidence. That Adriana Blackhill, leader of the Northern Territories, simply enjoyed books. That she wasn't there for her. But each visit chipped away at that lie. Adriana never looked around the store. Never wandered through shelves like a true reader would. No, her eyes always sought Hallie. And when they found her, she smiled. Slow. Curious. Patient. That was what unmoored Hallie more than anything. Patience. She'd expected arrogance. Command. The same sharp authority Hallie had read about in whispers and articles. But what she received was attention. Quiet, intentional attention. On the fourth day, Adriana approached the counter again. Hallie was cataloging a shipment, her fingers quick and efficient, her silence a shield. Adriana stood there, waiting. Not imposing, simply present. Then she pulled a folded piece of paper from her coat pocket and laid it on the counter. Hallie blinked. Slowly, she opened it. In slanted, elegant handwriting. "If you had a voice, what would you say right now?" Hallie stared at the words. Her chest tightened, throat burning in that familiar, dangerous way. Her instincts screamed to walk away, to disappear. But her hand moved before she could stop it. She flipped the paper and wrote, "You ask questions like someone who already knows the answers." Adriana's eyes lit with amusement. Only when the answers are beautiful. Hallie looked up. Their eyes met. The silence between them wasn't empty. It thrummed. Filled with tension. Pull. Potential. Hallie shook her head gently and handed the note back. Adriana didn't press. Instead, she placed a book on the counter, a first edition of The Secret Garden, and left exact change without a word. That night, Hallie couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, watching snow gather on the empty street. Her wolf itched beneath her skin, restless. The last time she'd shifted was the night of the betrayal, and it had ended in blood and humiliation. Since then, her wolf had been caged by fear, by silence, by the memory of her ex's voice whispering promises that turned to poison. But now, with Adriana's gaze etched behind her eyelids, that cage began to tremble. She dreamed of moonlight, of bare feet in snow, of a voice, deep and warm, saying her name like it meant something. The next morning, Adriana was waiting at the cafe across the street. She didn't approach, just watched. A quiet sentinel. Hallie tried to ignore the flutter in her chest. She buried herself in reshelving and organizing, but her fingers fumbled books, and her thoughts kept circling back to that note. If you had a voice, she did. She did. She just hadn't used it. Would Adriana hate her if she knew? Would she see the silence as a lie? Or worse, as weakness? The thought made Hallie's palms sweat. She glanced at the door. Adriana wasn't there. She'd left. Relief and disappointment tangled inside her like thorns. But when she returned to the counter, another note was waiting, tucked inside a copy of The Wolf Within. Hallie unfolded it, pulse racing. Sometimes I hear things others don't. Sometimes I feel things others can't name. That howl in the woods, I heard it. I'm not here to trap you. I'm here because something in me answered. Hallie dropped the note like it had burned her. Because something in her had answered too. Later that evening, as dusk painted the town in indigo and silver, Hallie slipped into the forest. Not to shift. Not yet. Just to breathe. But the wind carried a scent, cedar, cold air, and a trace of wildness she now recognized as Adriana. Her wolf surged. The silence she'd lived in for 3 years cracked open, just a little. And before she could stop herself, she tilted her head and let out a sound she hadn't meant to release. Not a howl, not a word. Just a soft, aching exhale. Somewhere, deeper in the trees, a howl answered. Low. Controlled. Alpha. Hallie froze. Her breath caught. Her heart broke against her ribs like wings trying to fly. She ran. Not from danger, but from what she wanted. From the risk of being seen. The next morning, Adriana didn't come to the bookstore. Hallie tried to pretend it didn't matter. But the space where the Queen's presence had been felt too loud. Too empty. She reached beneath the counter and pulled out the note again. Reread the words. Her fingers trembled. She opened the till, pulled out her own notepad, and scribbled just 2 lines. If you heard it, why didn't you chase me? She tucked it inside the secret garden and left it by the door. Just in case. Hallie didn't sleep that night. Not well. Not deeply. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw silver eyes in the dark, felt the weight of Adriana's stare like gravity pulling her off balance. The bookstore felt colder, without her presence. Quieter in the wrong way. She wasn't supposed to care, wasn't supposed to notice. But something inside her had shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to feel like danger. Or awakening. She tried to work, sorted a new shipment of secondhand titles, made tea, ignored the ache in her chest every time the bell above the door didn't chime, until it finally did. Late afternoon. Adriana walked in. Her presence hit like a wave, even without words. Hallie didn't lift her gaze immediately, pretending to be absorbed in restocking a shelf behind the counter. But she felt her. Every molecule. The air changed. Softer. Warmer. Heavier. Adriana approached the counter slowly, respectfully, and waited until Hallie finally looked up. Their eyes met. And for a few seconds, that was enough. Hallie's fingers clenched around the edge of the shelf. Adriana slid a small envelope across the counter. Not a note this time, stationery, sealed. Formal. Hallie raised an eyebrow. Adriana smiled, but it was quieter than usual. There's a dinner, she said softly. For the leaders. A gathering. I'd like you to come. Hallie blinked. Adriana added. You don't have to speak. You don't have to explain. Just come. Then she stepped back, her gloved hands retreating to her coat pockets. If you don't, I'll understand. But I'll be looking for you. She left without waiting for a response. Hallie stared at the envelope. It looked absurd in her hands, like something from a life she no longer belonged to. The words "I'd like you to come" echoed in her mind louder than anything had in years. She shouldn't. She couldn't. But still, that night, she opened her closet. Looked at dresses she hadn't touched since before the silence. Her fingers hovered over the fabric, hesitant. She hadn't been to a formal event since the betrayal. Since the night her voice was used against her. She could still hear her ex's laughter in the back of her mind, cruel and sweet and venomous. She could still see the faces of those who watched as she broke. She shut the door. No. But then her hand found the invitation again. And her wolf stirred. Not in fear. In something like defiance. The dinner was at the mayor's house, transformed into a makeshift meeting hall for the supernatural elite. Candles flickered in the snow-draped windows. Hallie stood across the street in the shadows, heart pounding, breath fogging in the air. Her coat was heavy, her nerves heavier. She could walk away. No one would blame her. But something pulled. Not just the memory of Adriana's voice, but the memory of her own howl. The one that had escaped her control. That had called. She crossed the street. Slowly. Reluctantly. But deliberately. Inside, the scent of wolves, witches, and fae mingled with expensive perfume and roasted meat. Music played low. Laughter rang out in pockets. No one noticed her at first. Until she did. Adriana, at the far end of the room, surrounded by alphas. She was wearing a tailored midnight suit, her hair swept back, presence commanding. And yet, when her eyes found Hallie's across the room, everything else fell away. Adriana excused herself, walked toward her without hesitation. Hallie stood still, pulse thrashing. Adriana stopped a breath away. Love what you've seen so far and want to help me keep creating these awesome stories on this channel? Then subscribe and hit the bell. Your subscription supports the channel and makes sure you get more exciting stories. No words, just a look. Something reverent. You came, she said. Hallie nodded. Adriana didn't touch her, didn't push, just smiled, the kind that felt like the sun after a long storm. Would you like to sit with me? Hallie hesitated, then took the smallest step forward. That was enough. Adriana led her to a table near the fireplace, slightly secluded. Their chairs were close. Hallie's body thrummed with alertness, but also, curiously, with calm. Adriana poured wine, but didn't toast. Didn't speak much at all. Only when they were alone enough that no one could hear, she leaned in and whispered, "When I was 17, I lost my voice too. Not literally, but the world stopped listening to me." Hallie blinked. Her fingers curled around the stem of her glass. "I had to earn everything back, piece by piece. So when I say I understand, I don't mean I pity you. I mean I see you." Hallie's throat burned. She didn't nod, didn't smile, just looked. And in her eyes, something opened. The meal ended too quickly. Conversations resumed around them. Adriana's hand brushed Hallie's wrist, accidentally, maybe. But the heat lingered. When it was time to leave, Adriana walked her out. Snow was falling again, gently, blanketing the world in softness. They stopped under a lamppost. Adriana turned to her. "Would you let me walk you home?" Hallie hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a pen, and scribbled on the edge of the invitation. "Only if you promise not to speak either." Adriana read it, smiled. "Deal." They walked in silence, step by step, side by side. Two wolves beneath a quiet moon. They walked together for nearly 20 minutes that night, not a single word spoken between them. And yet, it was the most intimate conversation Hallie had had in years. Every snowflake that landed on Adriana's shoulder, every soft puff of breath that drifted from her lips, every small pause in her steps, they all spoke in a language that didn't require sound. When they reached the steps of the bookstore, Hallie hesitated. Her key was cold in her palm. She could retreat inside, back to her quiet world, her unread letters, her silence. But she didn't want to. Not tonight. Adriana stood just a breath away, her presence anchoring, not pressing. She didn't ask to come inside. Didn't move closer. She just looked at Hallie like she was a sky finally clearing after a relentless storm. Hallie raised her notepad. "Thank you for not asking me why." Adriana's gaze softened. "I think I already know." That answer sent a strange tremor through Hallie's chest. Because if that was true, if Adriana knew and still stayed, what did that mean? She nodded, then turned and entered the building. That night, for the first time in 3 years, she didn't dream of betrayal. She dreamed of warmth, of strong hands brushing snow from her coat, of being looked at like she was seen. Over the next week, Adriana returned often, not just to the bookstore but outside of it. Once, she was already sitting in Hallie's favorite spot near the frozen river. Another time, Hallie found a thermos of hot tea with a note tucked into the lid, for when the world feels too loud. Every gesture was quiet, intentional, unassuming. But Hallie felt them, felt herself softening, felt her wolf stir not in fear, but in longing. Still, she didn't speak. And Adriana never asked her to. One afternoon, they sat in the back of the bookstore after hours, both reading different books. Adriana had started visiting after closing, claiming she needed silence to focus. Hallie didn't argue. Their sessions became routine. Adriana would bring pastries, Hallie would make tea, and they'd sit for hours in a companionship that didn't require conversation. But Hallie's mind was never still. Not really. Each moment chipped away at the wall she'd built. Every quiet smile, every shared glance, every time their hands accidentally touched when reaching for the same page. One evening, Adriana slipped a folded paper toward Hallie. On it was written, "Do you believe wolves can choose their mates?" Hallie stared at the words. Her heart pounded. She didn't answer right away. Didn't look up. When she finally picked up her pen, her handwriting was tighter than usual. "I stopped believing in that the night my mate betrayed me." Adriana's jaw tensed, just slightly. Her hands folded over themselves. "Then she was never your true mate." Hallie flinched, looked up. Adriana's gaze was steady. Not forceful, not dismissive, just honest. "Real bonds don't break like that. They bend. They hurt. But they don't destroy." Hallie looked away. Her pen hovered over the page, but she couldn't write anything. Because if she did, the next words would be a confession she wasn't ready to make. "But you feel like something I don't want to survive without." She changed the subject. Wrote, "You've stayed longer than planned. Why?" Adriana smiled, slow and devastating. "Because the most interesting thing I've ever felt happened in your forest. And I'm not leaving until I understand it." Before Hallie could respond, the bell above the bookstore's door rang. Hallie froze. No one ever came at this hour. Adriana stood, instantly alert. The scent hit Hallie before she saw the woman, cloyingly familiar, sickeningly sweet. Her stomach dropped. Her lungs forgot how to work. Because standing at the front of the store, framed by moonlight and snow, was her. The ex-tall, blonde, sharp, smiling like she owned the air Hallie breathed. Well, she said smoothly. "Still playing mute, Hallie? Or did you finally get bored of the act?" Adriana moved before Hallie could react. She crossed the store with a predator's grace, stepping between them. Her voice was low. "Lethal. Leave." The ex raised an eyebrow, amused. "And you are?" "Someone she doesn't owe a single sound." Hallie's knees nearly buckled. The ex tilted her head, smirked, then let her eyes drift to Hallie. "Still letting other people speak for you, I see. You haven't changed." That broke something. Hallie didn't speak, but she moved. Around Adriana, standing between the two of them now, her posture stiff, heart thundering. She raised her pen, scribbled one word. Turn the paper so her ex could read it. "Leave." The ex laughed. "You always were dramatic." But she turned, left, slamming the door hard behind her. The silence that followed was suffocating. Hallie stood frozen, trembling, the memory of 1,000 knives reopening all at once. Adriana reached for her, but stopped. "Do you want me to go?" she asked, voice gentle. Hallie shook her head violently. No. She didn't want to be alone. Not tonight. She turned and walked upstairs. Left the door open. Adriana followed. Upstairs, in the small, book-lined apartment above the store, Hallie finally let herself collapse into the corner of her couch. Adriana stood near the window, giving her space. Minutes passed. Then Hallie picked up a pen. Wrote. That was her. Adriana nodded once. "I know." Another note. "She told people I cheated. She made them laugh while I cried. She said my voice was fake when I begged her to stop." Adriana's fists clenched, but she didn't interrupt. Just waited. Hallie's pen moved again. Slower. Shaking. "So, I stopped using it. And no one asked why." Adriana stepped forward then. Sat beside her. Not too close, but close enough. "They didn't deserve your truth," she said quietly. "But I do. When you're ready." Hallie stared at her. Something behind her ribs broke open. She couldn't say the words, but she wanted to, desperately. She reached for her notepad, wrote 4 shaky words. "I don't want silence." Hallie didn't sleep that night. Her body lay still, wrapped in blankets, but her mind thrashed like it was trapped in a cage that had grown too small. The words she had written, "I don't want silence," echoed through her like a heartbeat she'd forgotten how to listen to. Adriana had stayed in the apartment until Hallie fell into restless sleep, curled in a corner of the couch like a wolf nursing a wound no one could see. The Alpha Queen hadn't touched her, hadn't spoken more than a handful of words. But her presence had held Hallie together when she felt she might shatter. Now, morning light crept across the floorboards in thin gold lines, and Hallie sat up slowly, her muscles stiff from sleep and fear and everything in between. She half expected Adriana to be gone. But she wasn't. The Queen was in the kitchen, quietly making tea as if it were the most natural thing in the world to be in someone else's home, in someone else's still bleeding grief. Hallie stepped into the doorway. Adriana looked over her shoulder and smiled, soft and warm, like sunlight after frost. "Good morning." Hallie didn't look away. She couldn't. Her mouth opened instinctively, then shut. But something inside her had already stirred.
Cracked.
She raised a finger. Waited. Adriana watched her in complete stillness. And then Hallie tried. Her lips parted. Her throat clenched. No sound came out. Not yet. But it wasn't nothing. It was the first real attempt. Adriana didn't comment. Didn't praise her. She just poured the tea and handed Hallie a cup, her fingers brushing Hallie's in a way that made her entire body hum. They sat in silence, but it wasn't like the silence from before. This one buzzed with anticipation, with emotion, with possibility. Later that day, the first snowstorm of the season rolled in, thick, wind-heavy, howling through the trees like a song only wolves could understand. The bookstore closed early. Hallie stayed upstairs, curled in the window seat with a blanket wrapped around her and Adriana's thermos in her hands. She watched the storm rage, her heart oddly still, until a scent hit her nose. Sharp.
Wrong.
Familiar. The ex was back. And she wasn't alone. Hallie didn't see her, but she felt her. Outside. Moving through the storm like a ghost dragging chains. Her wolf recoiled, snarling. Not out of fear, but instinct.
She wanted to protect.
She wasn't the same girl from before. Not anymore. She moved downstairs quickly, checking doors, locking windows, heart racing. She didn't know what the ex wanted, but nothing about her felt casual. Not anymore. When Adriana arrived later that night, snow clinging to her coat, Hallie didn't need to explain. One look at her, and the Alpha's body snapped into alertness. "She's close," Adriana said quietly. "I know." Hallie nodded. Adriana stepped close, voice low. "Do you want me to confront her?" Hallie hesitated, then shook her head. Her hands moved quickly, scribbling on a note. "I want to do it, just not yet." Adriana stared at the words for a long time, then nodded. "Then we'll wait."
We.
Hallie stared at that single word like it was a miracle. The storm howled louder. That night, Adriana didn't go home. Hallie didn't ask her to stay. Adriana didn't ask if she could. It just happened. They sat in the apartment again, this time closer. The space between them now felt intentional. Hallie read while Adriana worked on her tablet, answering messages from her pack and political allies. But occasionally, their hands would brush. Their eyes would meet. And something would pass between them like static. When it got late, Hallie stood and walked to the window. She could barely see the street now through the snow. Her breath fogged the glass. Behind her, Adriana's voice was a soft question. "What do you want most right now?" Hallie closed her eyes. The answer was too loud in her chest to write down. She turned slowly. Adriana was still sitting, one hand resting on the armrest, watching her with that calm, devastating patience. Hallie stepped forward. One step, then another, until she was standing right in front of Adriana's chair. The Queen looked up at her. And Hallie reached out.
Slowly, carefully.
Her fingertips touched Adriana's cheek. A breath caught between them. Hallie leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a big kiss. It wasn't hungry or desperate or wild. It was trembling, honest,
soft.
A whisper where a scream used to be. Adriana didn't move for a moment. Then her hand came up, cupped Hallie's waist, anchoring her. The kiss deepened by inches. Hallie made a sound, tiny, broken real. When they pulled apart, Adriana's forehead rested against Hallie's. "You're doing this on your terms," she whispered. "But I'm not going anywhere." Hallie closed her eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, the world didn't feel like it might collapse beneath her. The morning after the kiss came with no promises, but the air between them had changed. It wasn't tension, it was charged anticipation, the kind that made Hallie hyper-aware of every brush of Adriana's fingers, every glance that lingered half a second too long. They moved around the bookstore with quiet coordination, as if their bodies already knew how to exist in the same space. Hallie still didn't speak, but she didn't need to. Not with Adriana. When she looked at her, it was all there: desire, confusion, fear. The ache of being seen, and the terror of what it meant. Adriana never rushed her. Never demanded more than what Hallie could give. But that only made it harder. Because Hallie wanted to give more. Wanted to reach into herself and pull out all the words that had been locked away for so long, wrap them in warmth and place them gently in Adriana's hands. But every time she tried, her throat constricted. She couldn't. Not yet. Adriana stayed in town longer than any of the supernatural leaders. The summit had technically ended days ago, but she made no move to leave. Rumors started to spread in town, whispers about the Alpha Queen and the silent girl in the bookstore. Hallie ignored them. She'd spent 3 years being defined by rumors and lies. This time, she chose not to care. But the X was still there. Lurking. Watching. Hallie felt it, her scent in the woods, the way some of the town's older residents whispered when she passed. The past was stalking her, inching closer by the day. One evening, Hallie and Adriana sat across from each other in the apartment above the shop. The fireplace was lit, casting golden light across Adriana's face, and Hallie couldn't stop staring. She hadn't let herself want in a long time, but she wanted Adriana. In every way. And more than that, she trusted her. That was what made everything harder. Because with trust came vulnerability, and with vulnerability came risk, and Hallie knew better than anyone how sharp betrayal could cut. Adriana noticed her staring. "What are you thinking?" she asked gently. Hallie didn't look away. She picked up her notebook and wrote, "I want to say something to you.
I just don't know how."
Adriana reached across the table and covered Hallie's hand with her own. "Then don't say it yet. But stay here. With me. And when it's ready, I'll be here to hear it." Hallie nodded, and her eyes burned from the weight of that kindness. That night, she dreamt again. But it wasn't a nightmare. Not exactly. It was the memory. The moment her voice died. It was in a clearing, 3 years ago, surrounded by faces she once called friends. Her ex had told her they were gathering to celebrate her first shift as an adult, something sacred. She'd been nervous, but excited. She'd trusted them. What happened instead was humiliation. A cruel game. Her ex, smiling, lying, claiming Hallie had tried to steal another's mate. The others had laughed. Had believed. Had watched as Hallie broke. She'd tried to explain, to plead, but her voice had been drowned out by mockery. She remembered falling to her knees, the betrayal slicing deeper than any physical wound. And in that moment, something inside her had curled inward. Her wolf had receded. Her voice vanished. The pain of remembering jolted her awake. She sat up in bed, gasping. Sweat coated her skin. Adriana was sleeping on the couch, arm thrown over her eyes, lips parted in a peaceful expression Hallie had come to crave. She climbed out of bed and walked to the window. The snow was melting. Slowly. But it was. A sign of change. Of shift.
Of thaw.
She opened the window. Breathed. And then, barely audible, she tried again. Her voice cracked out of her throat, dry and broken. Adriana. She hadn't spoken a name in 3 years. The sound was a whisper, no louder than the wind, but it was real. She covered her mouth in shock, trembling. The voice hadn't sounded like hers. Not anymore. But it was enough to wake Adriana. "Hallie." Her voice was low, rough with sleep. Hallie turned, unable to repeat the sound, but her eyes said everything. Adriana sat up quickly, coming to her side, but not touching. "Did you say something?" Hallie nodded. Her chest ached with effort, but she nodded. Adriana's expression cracked, softening into something that made Hallie dizzy with emotion. "Say it again," she whispered. Hallie opened her mouth.
Tried.
But nothing came. Just breath. Just pressure. Adriana shook her head gently. "It's okay." That was enough. She reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind Hallie's ear. "You don't have to push it." But Hallie wanted to push it, because she didn't want to live behind a wall anymore. The next morning, they walked together through the woods. It was a quiet ritual they had adopted. These long, slow walks just outside the town's edge. Hallie hadn't shifted in years, but her body still remembered the rhythm of the earth, the heartbeat of the trees. Adriana stayed close, always a few steps behind, always watching without crowding. When they reached a clearing, Hallie paused. The air here felt different. Heavy. Familiar. Her wolf stirred. Her stomach turned. This was the place. The clearing from her memory. From the betrayal. She hadn't meant to come here. But her feet had brought her anyway. Adriana must have sensed it. She came up beside her, silent. Waiting. Hallie turned to her, face pale. Her hands shook as she reached for her notepad. "This is where she did it." Adriana read the words. Her jaw tightened. "Do you want to leave?" Hallie stared at the ground. The ghost of who she had been still clung to the snow here. The girl with hope. With a voice. She shook her head. Wrote again. "I want to bury it." Adriana bent down. Picked up a handful of snow. Let it melt in her hand. "Then let's start." Together, they knelt. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Hallie closed her eyes, imagined herself placing that broken memory into the earth, imagined sealing it there. Not forgetting it, but releasing it. And when she opened her eyes, she looked at Adriana, took a breath, and whispered, hoarse and soft, "I'm not her anymore." Adriana's eyes glistened. "No," she said. "You're stronger." The morning air was crisper than it had been in weeks, but Hallie barely felt the cold as she stepped out of the apartment above the bookstore. Something inside her had changed. Not entirely, not loudly, but irrevocably. A flicker of warmth where there had once been ice. Her voice, still raw and buried, had broken the surface. Adriana. And now the sound of that name lived inside her like a flame. She hadn't spoken it again. Not yet. But the memory of the way it had tasted in her mouth, the tremble it had carried, lingered like a secret between her lips. Adriana didn't press her. She didn't gloat. She didn't act like it meant anything more than what Hallie was ready to give. And yet, the way she looked at Hallie now, like she was watching something holy, made Hallie's chest tighten in ways she didn't know how to survive. They spent the day together, but not as queen and mute shopkeeper. Just as two women who had begun to orbit one another, caught in a gravitational pull neither of them could deny. They restocked books, drank tea, shared slices of orange cake from the cafe down the street, and spoke only in glances and scribbled notes. The silence had become their language. And yet, Hallie found herself yearning to shatter it. When Adriana laughed at something she wrote, Hallie wanted to respond with sound. When Adriana reached for her hand absent-mindedly as they passed in the hallway, Hallie wanted to say, "Don't let go." When Adriana looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered, Hallie wanted to whisper, "Stay." That night, they didn't bother with the separate couch and bed arrangement. Adriana entered the bedroom wordlessly and waited for Hallie's response. Hallie simply nodded, climbed into the sheets, and let the warmth of Adriana's body seep into hers like sunlight through a crack in the wall. They didn't touch more than a hand across the sheets. But it was more than Hallie had allowed anyone in years. More than intimacy. It was trust. She didn't sleep well. Her wolf stirred all night, restless, twitching under her skin, as if some ancient part of her already knew what the next day would bring. By mid-morning, the sky had turned gray again. Wind picked up. And then the door to the bookstore opened, and the scent that hit Hallie was unmistakable. Her ex. Again. She didn't slam the door this time. Didn't wear a mocking grin. No, this time, she wore calculation. And worse, confidence. Adriana wasn't there. She'd gone to a strategy meeting with another alpha leader just an hour before. Hallie was alone. The ex stepped inside, dressed in city leather, her eyes scanning the shelves like she owned the place. "It's cute," she said, fingers trailing across a copy of Wuthering Heights. Domestic. Quiet. Sad. Hallie didn't move from behind the counter. Her heart thudded hard, but not with fear. With fire. The ex stepped closer. "You know, I've been very generous. I could have told everyone months ago that your whole mute routine is a lie, that the poor silent girl has a voice, just locked away for sympathy." Hallie's fingers tightened around the edge of the wooden counter. Her wolf paced behind her ribs. "I mean, what would that queen of yours say, when she finds out the mate she's falling for has been pretending all this time?" Hallie's blood roared. Her hands shook, not from guilt, but fury. Because she hadn't been pretending. She'd been surviving. There was a difference. The ex leaned forward across the counter. "You don't deserve her. And I'll make sure she knows it." The bookstore bell chimed again. Adriana. She walked in, shaking snow from her coat, and immediately stilled when she saw the two of them. Her eyes flicked to Hallie. She sensed it. Instantly. The tension. The threat. "Is there a problem?" Adriana asked, her voice low, dangerous. The ex smiled sweetly. "Just reminding Hallie who she is." Adriana's eyes darkened. "She doesn't need reminders. And you're not welcome here." "Funny," the ex said, stepping back toward the door. "I'll be sticking around anyway. There's something satisfying about exposing liars. Even the quiet ones." And with that, she left. The silence she left behind was heavy. Hallie didn't look at Adriana. Couldn't. Not yet. But Adriana walked toward her slowly, eyes full of questions she didn't ask. Hallie picked up a pen. Wrote, "She's right about one thing. I can speak. I just chose not to. For 3 years." Adriana read it, then met her eyes. "That doesn't make you a liar." Hallie hesitated, then scribbled again. "If I told you why, would you still want me?" Adriana didn't answer immediately. She leaned on the counter, eyes searching Hallie's face. "You don't have to tell me everything right now. I can wait. But I want you. Not the version with a voice. Not the version who doesn't flinch. Just you." Hallie's throat ached. Her vision blurred. She didn't write anything else. Just rounded the counter and stepped into Adriana's arms. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was breaking. She felt like she was finally putting herself back together. That night, everything changed. They stood in the kitchen, neither reaching for the tea, just watching each other. A storm swirled outside the window, snow slashing sideways. But inside, heat bloomed. Slowly, tentatively, Hallie stepped forward. Her fingers slid into Adriana's. "Say it again," Adriana whispered. Hallie looked at her, and for the second time, let her voice out into the world. "Adriana." It was barely a whisper, but it was enough to make the queen close her eyes, like hearing it was pain and ecstasy all at once. "Again," she begged. Hallie stepped closer, rested her forehead against Adriana's. Her lips brushed her cheek. "Adriana." This time, the name trembled with something more than memory, with desire. Adriana's hands found Hallie's waist, pulling her flush against her. They kissed again, but not like before. This was deeper, wilder, not tentative, but desperate. Years of silence melted between them, replaced by heat and need and skin pressed against skin. Hallie let herself feel it all, the hunger, the fear, the life she thought she'd buried. She kissed Adriana like it was a second chance. A beginning. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, flushed, Adriana's voice was rough. "Tell me what you want." Hallie didn't hesitate this time. "You." The word was broken, but it was real. Hallie had never known silence could feel like this, full. After the night she whispered Adriana's name between kisses and let her voice crack open with want, everything inside her felt irrevocably altered. The silence she once used as armor had melted into something softer, something intimate. She still didn't speak often, and when she did, it came in hushed fragments, like each syllable was an offering, a risk. But with Adriana, it felt safe. Worth it. In the early morning light, Hallie lay in bed with her face tucked into Adriana's neck, the warmth of their bodies still clinging to the sheets. Her fingers traced idle shapes across the Alpha Queen's collarbone, memorizing every curve, every scar. Adriana's hand rested low on her back, grounding her. No words passed between them. None were needed. Until Hallie shifted slightly and whispered, voice rough, hesitant, "You're still here." Adriana's arms tightened around her. "Of course I am." Hallie's throat burned, not with pain this time, but emotion. She hadn't meant to say it aloud. The words had just slipped out. Like her voice was learning to trust again. Like she was. Later that morning, they dressed slowly, quietly, sharing small smiles and lingering touches that spoke more than any full conversation ever could. But as Hallie opened the front door of the bookstore to let in the weak daylight, her smile vanished. Taped to the glass was a flyer.
Cheap.
Printed. Prol. Her photo, an old one, was grainy in the corner, alongside bold black letters that read, "The girl who lied.
She can speak.
Ask her why she doesn't." Hallie's blood ran cold. Her stomach twisted. The words felt like claws raking down her spine. Adriana appeared behind her, jaw tightening as she read. She did this. Hallie didn't answer. She couldn't. Her pulse roared in her ears. Adriana took the flyer down, crumpled it in her fist. "She's trying to humiliate you. Push you into hiding." Hallie leaned against the doorframe, eyes shut tight. Her voice had barely returned. Her body still trembled with the weight of each word spoken. "And now this. What do you want to do?" Adriana asked gently. Hallie didn't respond right away. Her hands shook. Her wolf paced restlessly beneath her skin. For a moment, she felt that old panic creeping in, that urge to run, to shut down, to disappear into silence again. But then she remembered the sound of her name on Adriana's lips. The way she had said you when she asked what Hallie wanted. Not what anyone else expected. Not what the world demanded. What she wanted. Hallie looked up slowly. Her eyes met Adriana's. "I want to speak." Adriana's breath caught. "Are you sure?" Hallie nodded. "But not just to you." That afternoon, she wrote a note and slipped it into the pocket of Adriana's coat. "Tomorrow. Town Square. Let them see me. Let them hear me." Adriana read it in silence, then simply kissed her knuckles and whispered, "I'll be beside you." News spread quickly. Whispers passed from door to door. The silent girl was going to speak. The bookstore was closed the next morning. The window shuttered. The square was filled with curious eyes and murmured bets. Some townspeople remembered Hallie's arrival. Others had only ever seen her from a distance, mute and mysterious. The ex stood near the back of the crowd, arms crossed, a satisfied smile on her lips like a hunter waiting for her prey to fall into the trap. Adriana stood beside Hallie, calm, grounded, one hand brushing the back of Hallie's shoulder in a silent "I'm here." Hallie stepped forward, her heart beat like war drums. Her mouth was dry. The crowd murmured. Hallie's fingers trembled as she raised them to her lips.
She took a breath.
And then, finally, her voice, cracked, quiet, but unmistakably hers, broke through. "I can speak," she said. A hush fell like snow. "I haven't in 3 years. Not because I couldn't. Because I chose not to." She swallowed, forcing herself to keep going. "Because the last time I did, it was used against me. Twisted. Turned into something shameful." Her eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on her ex. She did that. A collective intake of breath. The ex stepped forward, but Hallie raised a hand, stopping her. "You broke me," Hallie said, voice shaking. "But I'm not broken anymore." Adriana's presence at her back was a silent storm, protective, proud. Hallie's voice grew stronger. "I stayed silent because I thought it was the only way to survive. But now I want more than survival. I want life, and love, and truth." She turned toward Adriana, then. I want her. Gasps echoed through the square. Adriana stepped forward, no hesitation, cupped Hallie's face, and kissed her. In public. In front of everyone. And the world didn't end. Hallie didn't crumble. The ex turned and left, face pale, lips pressed tight. The crowd was stunned, but not cruel. Some smiled. Some clapped. Some simply nodded in silent understanding. That night, they didn't return to the bookstore right away. Instead, Adriana led Hallie deep into the forest, to a clearing bathed in moonlight. Why here? Hallie asked, her voice still hoarse, but steady. Adriana turned to her. Because this is where I heard you first. Hallie's heart twisted. She remembered the night. The broken howl.
The shame.
But now, she stepped into the clearing without fear. Adriana tilted her head, her eyes glowing faintly with alpha gold. Will you let her out? Hallie knew what she meant. Her wolf. The side she'd buried for years. Slowly, trembling, Hallie nodded. She stripped off her coat. Let the cold kiss her skin. Adriana stepped back, shifting effortlessly, bones bending, fur blooming, paws replacing feet until a sleek black wolf stood watching her. Hallie stared, then closed her eyes, reached inside herself, and released the scream she'd been holding for too long. Her body shifted. Fur. Claws.
Power.
And when she looked up at Adriana through wolf's eyes, her mate howled. And Hallie finally held back. The snow glistened silver in the clearing, still marked with paw prints from the night. Hallie finally let her wolf out. Her howl still echoed in her ears, not as a haunting, but as a liberation. She'd stood in front of the town and claimed her voice. Claimed her past. Claimed Adriana. She should have felt invincible. But the strange thing about freedom was that it came with a cost. Because now people looked at her differently. Not with pity or disinterest. Those were easy to ignore. Now they looked at her with curiosity, with judgment, with memory. Like they didn't know how to reframe who she was. No longer the quiet girl behind the counter. No longer a mystery to be solved. Now she was real. And that made her vulnerable in ways silence never had. Adriana felt it too. In the days after the public confrontation, they tried to return to routine, but nothing was the same. People stopped Hallie on the street to thank her, to gossip, to pry. Some offered kindness. Others, suspicion. A few former friends of her ex whispered that Hallie had manipulated the crowd, that her performance had been perfectly timed. That she was only speaking now because it suited her. Hallie tried not to let it reach her, but the doubt crept in like frost at the edges of a window. Adriana's presence was still grounding, still warm, but now, eyes followed them everywhere. You don't have to stay, Hallie said one evening, her voice low and hesitant, as they sat curled up on the bookstore couch. Adriana blinked. What? Your duty. Your title. You're the Alpha Queen. You've stayed too long. People are noticing. Adriana didn't answer immediately. She studied Hallie's face, then reached over and gently brushed her thumb across Hallie's jaw. Do you want me to leave? Hallie's silence said everything. Adriana sighed. Then I'm staying. Let them talk. But it wasn't just talk. The Supernatural Council sent a formal letter, polite but sharp. They questioned Adriana's continued absence from her territory, asked if her emotional involvement in Elkridge was compromising her judgment. Rumors swirled that the queen had found her mate and was distracted, that she'd abandoned duty for desire. Hallie felt the weight of it. And worse, she saw the weight settle on Adriana's shoulders. One afternoon, Adriana stood at the edge of the forest, eyes locked on the mountains in the distance. They want me to return, she said quietly. Hallie stood beside her, stomach twisting. Will you? Adriana didn't look at her. I have to. For a few days. To remind them who I am. The air between them went still. Hallie's wolf whimpered beneath her skin, not in fear, but in protest. She hadn't realized how deeply she'd come to rely on Adriana's presence until the thought of her leaving settled in. It's not permanent, Adriana added quickly. I'll come back. I always come back to you. Hallie nodded, but her throat was tight. That night, She woke from a dream with her heart racing. In it, she'd been walking through the town, but everyone ignored her. She tried to call out, to speak, but her voice was gone again. No matter how hard she screamed, nothing came out. She sat up in bed, gasping, hand pressed to her chest. Adriana stirred beside her. "Hallie." She shook her head. Adriana pulled her close without a word, arms wrapping tight, steady. "I'm not going far," she murmured. "You're stronger than this fear." But Hallie wasn't afraid of losing her voice. She was afraid of losing Adriana. The next morning, they stood at the edge of the town. Adriana, in her dark coat, power radiating from every inch of her, looked every bit the alpha queen the world remembered. But her eyes, when they met Hallie's, held only softness. "I'll be back by the full moon," she said. "And when I return," she didn't finish the sentence. But the implication lingered. "When I return, things will change." Hallie nodded, tried to smile. She didn't cry. Not until the SUV disappeared into the trees. The days that followed felt slower, heavier. She returned to the bookstore, now watched by a rotating pair of quiet guards Adriana had insisted on leaving behind. They didn't intrude, but their presence reminded everyone that Hallie was not just a local anymore. She was the alpha's mate. At night, she couldn't sleep. Her wolf paced. Her voice itched at the back of her throat. She kept speaking in small pieces, trying to keep the muscle from atrophying. Whispering into the dark, she practiced saying Adriana's name like a mantra. But the loneliness returned. "Thank you so much for being here, and a body was found at the edge of the woods. If you feel in your heart, not a local, you can donate with super thanks so I can focus more and more on this project. Your support helps me keep creating these love stories as the sheriff and bringing them to life for you. Half human. See you in the next video." Tried to piece together what had happened. "You think it's territorial?" she asked. "Or revenge?" The sheriff shook his head. "Could be a warning. Or bait." Hallie's stomach dropped. That night, another flyer appeared on her window. No photo this time. Just words. "You think you're safe because she loves you. But she can't protect you from all of us." Hallie crumpled the paper with trembling hands. The threat wasn't just about shame anymore. It was about blood. She sat at her kitchen table, hands shaking, and forced herself to pick up the phone. She hadn't used it to speak in years. But now she dialed. It rang once.
Twice.
And then, "Hallie." Adriana's voice was breathless on the other end. Hallie's eyes filled with tears. "I need you," she whispered. The call ended in silence, but it was the kind of silence that carried promise. Hallie didn't know what words Adriana was holding back on the other end of the line, only that the line hadn't gone dead, only quiet, heavy with something deep and immediate. Less than 6 hours later, the black SUVs returned to Elkridge. Not slowly, not discreetly. The convoy tore through the forest road like thunder, a warning shot louder than any howl. Adriana stepped out before the engine cut, her eyes already scanning the street for one thing only. Hallie. And when she found her, standing outside the bookstore with that same determined, trembling stillness, she didn't speak. She just walked straight to her and pulled her into an embrace so fierce it knocked the wind from Hallie's lungs. Hallie pressed her face into Adriana's neck, whispering, "You came early." "Of course I did," Adriana breathed. "I felt it in my chest the second you said you needed me." Behind them, guards flanked the street, already on alert. The murder of the rogue wolf had sent ripples through the region. And the note left on Hallie's window had changed everything. This wasn't just about shame anymore. This was war bait. Hallie hadn't felt like someone who belonged in this world of alphas and council politics. She'd spent years trying to be invisible. But standing beside Adriana now, her scent all over Hallie's skin, her presence loud and unyielding, she realized she wasn't invisible anymore. She was the mate of a queen. And that meant people would come for her, not because she was weak, but because she mattered. They walked into the bookstore together. Adriana closed the shop early, pulled the curtains, and summoned her inner circle for a private meeting. Hallie watched from the stairs, half-shadowed, as maps were laid out and alliances were reviewed. It wasn't just a rogue death. Adriana said, voice razor-sharp. That body was dumped in our territory. Shifter claws, but with which magic laced through the wounds. It's coordinated. Message, her beta asked. Adriana nodded. To me. Through her. She didn't have to say Hallie's name. Everyone knew. One of the guards glanced toward the stairs. Should we move her to the capital? Adriana looked up sharply.
No.
She's not going anywhere. If they think she's a weakness, they'll learn she's a weapon. Hallie's heart pounded. She hadn't expected to be protected like this, but being defended was one thing. Being included was another. Adriana dismissed her circle after an hour, leaving only the two of them in the quiet. Hallie stepped down the last stair. You think this is about me? It's through you, not about you. Adriana reached for her hand. You're my mate. That puts a target on you, yes, but it also gives you power. Hallie's lips parted. I don't want power. That doesn't matter, Adriana said gently. You have it. That night, they didn't sleep. They talked. Truly talked. Hallie used her voice when she could, hoarse and soft, resting when it cracked. Adriana listened to every word like it was gold. Hallie told her things she hadn't told anyone. About how silence had once felt like safety, how the quiet had protected her in ways people never understood. It wasn't just hiding, she whispered. It was control. I didn't want to be used again. Adriana nodded. You weren't weak. You were choosing yourself. Hallie blinked fast against the tears. And now you're choosing us. The next day, Adriana summoned the town council to the bookstore. Not in a back room. Not in secret. In the front, windows open, public. She stood beside Hallie, her hand on the small of her back, and announced, This town is no longer neutral.
Gasps.
Murmurs. Elkridge falls under my protection, she continued. And any threat to my mate is a declaration against me. Hallie stared straight ahead, her wolf still and strong inside her. Her knees didn't buckle. Her voice didn't break. She was done being hidden. The moment ignited something. Whispers spread to nearby towns. Some viewed it as arrogance, a queen claiming a town for love. Others saw it for what it truly was, a warning. That night, Hallie had a dream. Not of her past. Not of her silence. She dreamed of a throne room, bathed in moonlight, and herself standing beside Adriana. Not as an ornament, not as a weak point, but as an equal. When she woke, her body thrummed with something unfamiliar. Not fear. Not grief. Readiness. She dressed in quiet focus and stepped into the forest. Alone. Adriana would have stopped her. But Hallie needed this. To feel the woods under her feet.
To feel like she belonged.
The trees didn't reject her. The wind didn't hide from her. She walked deeper, her breath slow, her wolf listening. Then she heard it. A growl.
Low. Nearby.
Not familiar. Not pack. A lone wolf emerged between the trees, fur dark and mottled, eyes glowing with challenge. Hallie shifted before she had time to think.
Bones. Heat.
Power. Her paws landed hard against the frozen soil.
Her teeth bared.
The wolf circled. Snarled. Hallie didn't back down. She didn't attack, either. She held her ground, like a queen's mate should. And when the wolf lunged, she met it. Not with ferocity. With precision. Every move calculated. Controlled. Her wolf moved like she had never forgotten what it meant to fight. And when she pinned him to the ground, her fangs at his throat, she didn't bite. She howled. And from a distance, another howl answered. Adriana. The howl echoed through the forest, wild and proud, and when Hallie heard Adriana's voice answer from somewhere beyond the trees, her wolf didn't retreat. She stood taller. The lone invader beneath her paws whimpered as her fangs hovered over his throat, the power in her stance unmistakable. For years, she had lived as the girl who didn't speak. Now, her howl thundered through the mountain like a declaration. I'm not hiding anymore. By the time Adriana arrived, her massive black wolf charging through the trees with rage in her eyes, Hallie had already shifted back. The intruder, half conscious and limping, had fled into the darkness, blood trailing behind him. Hallie stood barefoot in the snow, chest heaving, skin streaked with scratches, but unbroken. Adriana shifted back instantly, wrapping her coat around Hallie's shoulders and cupping her face. "You're bleeding," she said, voice shaking with fury. "Why were you out here alone?" Hallie gripped her wrist, her voice hoarse but steady. "Because I needed to prove to myself that I could stand on my own."
Adriana didn't speak.
She only pulled her into a crushing embrace and whispered, "You terrify me." Hallie's lips brushed her ear. "Good." The next morning, news of Hallie's stand in the forest spread like wildfire. Not because Adriana told anyone, but because the forest did. The rogue scent had been marked with the signature of a rival pack, one that had once been exiled by the council for crossing borders and defying oaths. Now, they were testing the Queen's resolve through Hallie. But instead of weakening her position, it did the opposite. Whispers began to ripple through the shifter communities. The Silent One is a fighter. The mate of the Alpha Queen is not just a symbol, she's a force. Days later, a letter arrived. Delivered not by courier, but by Raven, an old signal of parley. A proposed summit. A truce. An invitation to discuss boundaries and peace between Adriana's domain and the encroaching rogue allies. It was addressed not only to Adriana but to Hallie. "They want you there," Adriana said, frowning at the parchment. "Not just as a witness, as a player." Hallie stared at the letter. Her stomach twisted, not with fear, but something more complicated. "Why would they invite me?" "Because you humiliated one of their wolves," Adriana said. "And because your voice holds power now. People are listening." Hallie exhaled slowly, eyes tracing the bold, inked seal. "Then let them hear me." The summit was set to take place on neutral ground, in the ruins of an old castle long buried by forest. Adriana's convoy doubled in size for security. Hallie rode beside her, cloaked in black, her hair braided back, her eyes calm but sharp. She wasn't dressed as a victim. She was dressed like a queen's equal. When they arrived, the enemy pack leaders were already waiting. Tall, fierce wolves with cold eyes and polite smiles. At their center stood a woman in crimson, Leora, the newly self-declared leader of the Rogue Alliance. She had the kind of beauty that drew blood, sharp, elegant, and dangerous. Her gaze locked on Hallie immediately. "So," she said, smiling without warmth, "the mute speaks now." Hallie met her gaze, without flinching. "And you listen now." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Adriana's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but approval. The summit began with formalities, long-winded speeches about unity and ancestral borders. But it was all smoke. Hallie could feel it. This wasn't about peace. It was about testing them. Leora's eyes never left her. "Tell me, Hallie," she said mid-discussion, her tone mockingly curious. "When did you find your voice again? Was it before or after you warmed the Queen's bed?" Adriana moved so fast her beta had to stop her from lunging. Hallie, however, didn't blink. She stood slowly, eyes locked on Leora. "The night I took back my voice," she said, every word cutting like a blade, "was the night I stopped letting women like you define my worth." Leora tilted her head. "Careful. You're not a wolf of title." "No," Hallie said. "But you just made the mistake of giving me a platform." Then she turned, slowly, to face the entire gathering. The forest was quiet. All ears were on her. "I lost my voice because I was betrayed," she said, her voice shaking but rising. "And I stayed silent because I believed no one would ever see me as more than the girl who broke." She looked at Adriana, who stood still, eyes burning with pride. "But I broke open, not apart. And if you think I'm going to run now that you've noticed me, then you don't understand what happens when you corner someone who's spent years surviving." Her wolf flickered beneath her skin, golden and strong. "I am not here to be quiet. I am not here to be decoration. I am the mate of your queen. And if you threaten her, if you threaten me, I will respond, not with silence, but with fire." A pause. "Then, do you understand me now?" Leora smiled, but there was something tense behind her eyes. "Perfectly." Adriana took Hallie's hand as they turned away. No more negotiation. No more pretend peace. That night, in the dark safety of the convoy tent, Adriana kissed her slowly, reverently. You don't need to be crowned to be royalty, she whispered. You just proved that. Hallie smiled, breathless, raw. I didn't say any of that for them. Adriana leaned closer, voice warm against her ear. I know. You said it for you. And Hallie realized then, her voice wasn't something that could be taken, broken, or owned. It was hers. And now it was unleashed. The snow returned like a prophecy. Thick, slow flakes drifting through the night sky, softening the jagged edges of the world, but Hallie felt no warmth in its beauty. Not this time. Because as soon as she and Adriana returned from the summit, something shifted in the air of Elkridge. Something subtle, strategic, dangerous. The enemy hadn't responded to Hallie's speech with violence. Not immediately. Instead, they'd gone quiet. Too quiet. And that was worse. Adriana's advisors wanted her to bring Hallie to the capital to protect her until the threat passed. She's too visible now, one had said. Leora won't stop until she dismantles what Hallie represents, until she turns her into a liability. But Adriana didn't order Hallie to hide. She turned to her mate, calm but unwavering. What do you want? Hallie met her gaze without hesitation. To stay. Then we stay. The decision wasn't without consequence. Rumors spread. Some questioned Adriana's objectivity. Others whispered that Hallie was now pulling strings, that her speech at the summit had been rehearsed, manipulative, calculated. Hallie ignored them, or tried to, but she wasn't a politician. She didn't crave power or approval. She only wanted truth, and to never again surrender the voice she'd fought to reclaim. Days passed. Watchful. Heavy. And then it happened. A familiar scent appeared in the woods just outside town. Hallie caught it first. She was organizing new stock in the bookstore when her wolf suddenly bristled, panic blooming fast and hard. She stepped outside, eyes scanning the tree line. The cold wind carried it in, bitter and unmistakable. Lavender and rain. A scent from her past. From her before. Her name was Mara. She had once been Hallie's childhood best friend, long before everything had fallen apart. Long before she'd chosen to side with Hallie's ex and become part of the betrayal that broke her voice. Seeing her again was like swallowing glass. Mara didn't approach the bookstore. She waited in the woods. A calculated move. Not forcing her way in. Just being seen. Hallie didn't follow her immediately. She took a breath.
2.
Then shifted. Her wolf surged forward without hesitation. When she reached the clearing, Mara was already there, leaned against a frost-covered tree, eyes steady, posture casual. You look different, she said. Hallie shifted back, not bothering with clothes. Letting the cold sting her skin instead of her memories. Because I am. Mara's smile was small, almost wistful. You speak now. Hallie didn't respond. Mara sighed. I didn't come to fight you. Then why did you come? Mara stepped forward. Because they sent me. Hallie's blood ran cold. Leora. A nod. She thinks I still matter to you. That maybe I can reach the part of you that's scared of who you've become. Hallie narrowed her eyes. And you? I don't know. Mara's voice wavered. I thought I was doing the right thing back then. That siding with them, your ex, was the smarter move. You were spiraling, Hallie. You were in love, and love made you stupid. It made you vulnerable. It made me honest, Hallie snapped, her voice breaking open. It made me brave. Until you used it against me. Mara looked down. I regret it. But regrets don't matter much now, do they? Hallie crossed her arms, her voice quiet but cutting. You were the first person I trusted. And the first person who taught me never to trust again. Mara flinched. I'm sorry. That's not enough. I know. Hallie turned to go. Tell Leora, I'm not scared of my past anymore. And I'm not scared of you. But as she stepped back toward the town, Mara's voice followed her. She's not going to stop with you, Hallie. She wants Adriana. And she knows the only way to break a queen is through her mate. That night, Hallie sat in silence while Adriana paced the apartment, anger bleeding from her every movement. She sent Mara? That's how low she's willing to go. Hallie didn't speak. Her throat was tight again, not with silence, but with pressure. A storm building. This isn't about territory anymore, Adriana muttered. It's not even about you being my mate. It's about what you represent. You stood in front of them and used your pain like a blade. That terrified them. Hallie finally looked up. Then let's make them more afraid. Adriana stilled. Hallie. But Hallie rose from the chair, her eyes steady. They think I'm fragile. That I'm some girl you picked up off the ground and polished into a symbol. She stepped closer. Let me show them I'm not. The next day, Hallie walked into the pack council chambers with Adriana at her side. She stood before warriors, politicians, emissaries, and alphas, and she spoke. Her voice cracked, but it carried. I won't be used as bait. I won't be a symbol of silence. And I won't be hidden. She paused, breath trembling. But I won't fight this war the way they want me to either. A murmur spread. One of the older alphas narrowed his eyes. Then what are you proposing? Hallie raised her chin. A gathering.
Public.
Open. On neutral ground. Let them all come. All packs. All leaders. If Leora wants a stage so badly, let's give it to her. Adriana tensed beside her. Hallie, no more shadows, she said firmly. Let the world see who we really are. That night, alone in their bed, Adriana pulled her close. You don't have to do this to prove anything to me. Hallie buried her face in her shoulder. I'm not doing it for you. She tilted her head up, voice low. I'm doing it for her, for the version of me who never thought she'd be strong enough to speak again. Adriana kissed her. Not out of desire, but out of reverence. Then let's show the world exactly who you are. And Hallie whispered back, let them listen. The date was set. The gathering would take place under the full moon, in the sacred glade where ancient treaties had once been written in blood and sealed in magic. A place untouched by time, where wolves once came to speak truths too dangerous for war, and where Hallie would now speak hers. But as the day approached, something shifted between her and Adriana. Not distance, not resentment, just tension. Heavier than before. Softer, too, but no less sharp. They moved together like always, side by side, hands brushing, shoulders aligned. But when they touched, there was hesitation beneath the heat. When they kissed, Hallie felt it, the pull, the need, but also the fear. Not fear of love. Fear of what came with it. One night, 3 days before the gathering, Hallie stood by the window, wrapped in a wool blanket, her eyes fixed on the stars. Adriana approached silently, wrapping her arms around Hallie from behind. You haven't slept. Neither have you. They didn't deny it. Didn't pretend. Hallie turned slowly in her mate's arms, tilting her head up. Do you think I'm ready? Adriana didn't answer immediately. Her hands slid down Hallie's spine, anchoring her. I think you've already done more than anyone expected of you. That's not what I asked. Adriana met her gaze. I think you were born ready. Hallie didn't believe her. Not entirely.
But she wanted to.
That night, they didn't touch each other with heat. They touched with history. With everything they hadn't said out loud. And when Hallie fell asleep with her head on Adriana's chest, her dreams weren't of betrayal. They were of roots. Of things buried deep. She saw a woman she didn't recognize. Pale hair. Violet eyes. A voice like thunder whispering in a language she couldn't understand. When Hallie woke, her fingers tingled. Her throat burned, not with fear, but with magic. I think, she whispered aloud, something's waking up in me. Later that day, Adriana received a visitor from the capital. A wolf elder. Female. Cold. Regal. She pulled Adriana aside while Hallie lingered upstairs, listening through the heating vent without shame. You've bound yourself to her, the woman said. But do you know what she is? Adriana's voice was low. She's mine. She's more than that. That speech at the summit, her shift after years of silence, The dream she's having now, this isn't coincidence. A pause. You need to look at her bloodline. Adriana's voice sharpened. Are you implying she's dangerous? I'm saying she may not be just a wolf. That night, Hallie stood outside the bookstore, staring up at the sky, her breath rising in clouds. She felt strange. Not wrong. Just expanded. Like something inside her had finally stretched after being trapped in a box for too long. Her senses were sharper, her body warmer, and her dreams more vivid than ever. When she returned inside, Adriana was waiting, arms folded, a look on her face Hallie didn't recognize. Not anger, not concern, but something reverent. What? Hallie asked. Adriana didn't answer right away. Then she stepped forward and placed a small leather-bound book in Hallie's hands. This was your mother's. It was left in the records when she died. Hallie froze. You've been looking into me? Adriana shook her head. I wasn't going to. I swore I wouldn't. But the council did it for me. They're scared. Not because you're weak. Because you're different. Hallie opened the book slowly. Her mother's handwriting was delicate, looping. The pages weren't letters. They were spells.
Notes.
Rituals. And one sentence repeated in nearly every entry. She was born under a silver moon. She will carry both the howl and the storm. Hallie's hands trembled. What does that mean? Adriana's voice was quiet. It means you're not just a shifter. Then what am I? You're part wolf, part witch. The words struck like lightning, but the strange thing was, they fit. The dreams. The way her voice had returned in waves, like echoes of power. The energy in her chest that never stopped humming. Why didn't anyone tell me? Maybe your mother hid it. Or maybe it just hadn't awakened yet. Hallie stared down at the pages. A note scrawled in the corner caught her eye. She will speak not only for herself, but for those who have lost their voices. Her blood is memory. Her howl a warning. She looked up. This gathering, this isn't just about me, is it? Adriana exhaled.
No.
And it never was. You knew. I suspected. But I didn't care what you were. I loved you anyway. Hallie stepped forward, placing her hands on Adriana's chest. But now they'll see me as something else. A weapon. A threat. Let them, Adriana whispered. You've been underestimated for too long. Hallie closed her eyes. Her voice, when it came, was steady. Then I'll give them something to be afraid of. The next morning, the final preparations began. The glade was being reinforced with protection spells. Neutral packs began to arrive from distant territories, some out of curiosity, others out of fear. And in every whisper, Hallie's name carried weight. Some called her the Storm Singer, others the Witch Wolf, and still others simply the girl who speaks again. That night, Hallie sat alone by the fireplace. The book her mother had left open in her lap. She ran her fingers over the ink. Her bloodline wasn't a weakness. It was a legacy. A weapon, yes, but one forged by generations of women who had survived the silence, the fire, the war. She looked up at the moon.
Full.
Close. Watching. I know who I am now, she whispered. And I won't let you bury me again. Behind her, Adriana stepped into the room, quietly watching her. Are you ready for tomorrow? Hallie turned. Her voice was soft, but unshakable. I was born ready. The glade had never seen so many wolves. Under the light of a full silver moon, the sacred gathering ground was transformed, encircled by torches that hissed in the cold, glowing softly against a sea of fur, leather, armor, and suspicion. Representatives from every major pack in the region stood on neutral soil, their banners raised, their expressions guarded. They hadn't come to listen. They'd come to watch a spectacle. Some expected diplomacy. Others expected chaos. But what none of them expected was her. Hallie stood at the edge of the ancient stone platform, dressed not as a warrior nor as a queen's consort, but in a deep gray cloak that shimmered faintly with woven runes. Her hair was braided back, revealing a thin scar just under her jaw, a scar she'd once hated, now worn like a crown. Her eyes glowed faintly with both wolf and witch. And when she walked toward the center of the circle, silence fell. Not commanded. Not forced.
Given.
Adriana followed 3 steps behind her. Not leading her. Supporting her. Letting the world see that the Alpha Queen walked with her mate. Not in front of her. Not above her. The elders seated at the perimeter exchanged uneasy glances. Even Leora, lounging like a predator across from the center platform, arched a brow. "Well," she said lazily, her voice slicing the silence. "She does look the part." Hallie turned slowly to face her. "You talk like this is a game." Leora's smirk widened. "Isn't it?" Hallie stepped onto the stone platform fully. Her voice didn't need to rise. It was low, even.
Calm.
But it carried like thunder beneath the surface of a lake. "Let me tell you a story." The audience shifted.
Surprised.
Curious. Leora looked amused. Hallie continued. "There was once a girl who loved words. She believed in them. Believed that if you said the truth out loud, people would hold it sacred." She looked directly at Leora now. She was wrong. Adriana's hands curled into fists behind her. Hallie's voice stayed steady. Because one day, she gave her truth to someone who used it as a weapon, who twisted her voice into a joke, who made her believe that silence was safer than hope. The wolves around the circle listened, breaths held, muscles tensed. So, she stopped speaking. For 3 years, she vanished inside herself. And the world moved on, convinced she was broken. She paused. But silence doesn't mean surrender. Leora rolled her eyes. Touching. But none of this explains why we should believe that you. I'm not here to ask you to believe anything. Hallie's words hit sharp. I'm not here to beg for space, or for safety. I'm here to claim what's mine. Power shimmered in the air. Light magic. Subtle but undeniable. The witches in the crowd sat up straighter. Even the wolves sensed it. The way the ground beneath Hallie's feet seemed to hum. You made me think my voice had no power, Hallie said, eyes still locked on Leora. But now that I know what it is, I won't let you silence anyone else. Leora stood slowly, smile tight. You think you scare me? No, Hallie said. I think I remind you of every woman you tried to bury and failed. Leora's eyes narrowed. Careful, girl. You're not untouchable. Adriana finally stepped forward, her voice a low snarl. She doesn't need to be untouchable. She's not alone. Magic coiled in Hallie's chest. Ancient. Heavy. Her fingers tingled, and the pendant at her neck, a small crystal given to her by Adriana days ago, glowed faintly. A warning. A signal. Leora noticed it. What is that? A seal, Hallie said softly. A protective charm. Worn by witches with royal bloodlines. She pulled the pendant free, letting it dangle from her fingers. It was my mother's. She died hiding what I was. You tried to make me ashamed of that. But today, I speak for her. Leora scoffed. You think a bloodline and a few spells make you a threat? Hallie smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression she'd ever worn. No, she stepped forward. This does. Then she lifted her hand, and the torches around the glade flared, fire spiraling upward, controlled and sharp. Wolves yelped. Some backed away. The ground pulsed beneath them. The stone platform cracked slightly under her feet. The air shifted, heavy with her. I am not just a wolf, Hallie said, her voice echoing with more than sound now. And I'm not just a witch. I am what happens when you try to silence someone who is born to lead. Then she turned, slowly, and addressed the circle. You don't have to follow me. You don't have to fear me. But you will never erase me again. The silence that followed was absolute. And then, from somewhere in the crowd, a wolf howled. Then another. And another. Not as challenge. As recognition. Adriana stepped forward, eyes burning. You have your answer, she said to the gathered leaders. You wanted to see what she was. You just did. Leora didn't respond. Not at first. Her eyes flicked from Adriana to Hallie, calculation now replacing arrogance. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "No," Hallie replied, voice like firelight. "It's just beginning." The gathering ended without blood. But something far more powerful had been spilled. Fear. And reverence. That night, as the glade emptied and only the inner circle remained, Hallie stood at the edge of the ancient stones, her hands still pulsing with aftershocks of power. Adriana approached from behind. "You burned like a star tonight." Hallie turned, exhausted but steady. "Are you scared of me now?" Adriana cupped her face, gaze unflinching. "I've never been more in love with you." Hallie leaned into her touch, voice breaking softly. "It felt good."
Right.
Like I was always meant to do this." "You were." Adriana kissed her, slow and deep, then whispered, "But remember, being powerful doesn't mean you can't lean on someone. You don't have to carry it all alone." Hallie rested her forehead against Adriana's. "Then stay with me. When the storm comes, I'll be the one standing in the rain beside you," Adriana promised. And above them, the full moon watched in silence, its light no longer cold, but blessing. They came when the sky was silent, when the last ember of sunlight vanished behind the mountains and the wind stopped pretending to be anything other than warning. Hallie felt them long before they arrived, something twisting in her chest, not pain exactly, but recognition. The cold air shifted with the scent of old magic and memory, and her breath stilled in her lungs as though her body remembered what her mind hadn't been ready to face. Adriana stood beside her on the porch of the bookstore, her arms folded tight across her chest, her gold eyes glowing faintly, every muscle in her body coiled like a storm held back only by love. "They're here," Hallie said softly, her voice barely a breath. "Are you sure?" Adriana asked, but she already knew the answer. Hallie nodded once. "They're not from this time. They're from before. From my blood." The words tasted strange in her mouth. She had spent so long pretending to be just a girl, just a wolf who had gone quiet. Now she knew the truth. She was something else. Something more. The first howl rose from the woods, not a living wolf, but something hollow, distant, like an echo from under the earth. Then came another, sharper, closer, like the air itself splitting open. Adriana reached for Hallie's hand, gripping it tightly. "You don't have to go alone." "I know," Hallie said, "but I have to go first." The forest welcomed her like it had been waiting. Shadows moved between trees, some shaped like wolves, others like women, all of them wrong in the same ancient way. Hallie stepped into the clearing and saw them. 5 figures cloaked in mist and memory, each one carrying a piece of her mother's face, her grandmother's voice, her ancestors' wrath. The leader had eyes like smoke and hair like frost. She smiled when she saw Hallie. "Daughter of the Silver Line," she said, her voice layered like wind through broken windows. "You've returned to us at last." "I didn't come back," Hallie replied, her voice steady. "I rose." The figures hissed like ice cracking. "You were meant to continue the silence. You were meant to be the last. You were supposed to disappear." "Then you shouldn't have left me alive," Hallie said. "Because now I'm more than memory. I'm fury." The shadows surged. They didn't attack with claws but with visions, images of her mother burning rituals in secret, of elders casting her out, of Hallie as a child crying out and no one answering. They tried to drown her in grief. But Hallie didn't drown.
She spoke.
"No more," she shouted, and the clearing shook with her voice. "I am not your shame. I am your reckoning." The shadows reeled back. One tried to reach her, whispering promises of power, of legacy, of joining their eternal silence. Hallie lifted her hand, and with it came a wave of heat, raw, untrained magic fused with the pulse of her wolf. The figure disintegrated into ash and memory. Adriana burst through the trees then, shifting midair, her black wolf crashing down beside Hallie in a snarl that shook the pines. But Hallie held up her hand again. "It's done," she said. "They're gone." And they were. Not defeated by violence, but by truth. The ancestral spirits had come to reclaim her voice, and found it too strong to touch. The forest quieted. The moon broke through the clouds above them. Hallie turned to Adriana, her skin still burning from the magic, her eyes glowing with something ancient. "I need to run." Adriana shifted in response. No questions, no hesitation. Her massive black wolf stood proud and still, waiting. Hallie shifted too, her transformation smooth now, instinctive. Her body cracked and reshaped into fur, her breath coming faster as her paws touched the earth, her heart sinking to a rhythm she had denied for too long. Together, they ran. Through trees and shadows, through wind and stars. The forest blurred around them, a streak of silver and black weaving between branches and snow, two wolves who had nothing left to fear. Their paws pounded the earth with rhythm and purpose, and every step forward erased a step away from pain. Hallie ran with her mouth open in a silent howl, not needing to speak because everything she'd ever wanted to say lived in the way she moved beside Adriana. The bond between them wasn't just heat now, it was history, it was healing, it was a promise written in fur and bone. When they reached the edge of the cliff, where the trees opened to a view of the valley below bathed in moonlight, they stopped. Their bodies heaved with effort. The moon watched silently, full and proud. And then they shifted back. Naked, breathless, alive. Hallie's hair stuck to her cheeks, her skin flushed and glowing. Adriana turned to her, her eyes still golden, her mouth slightly parted. "You're not afraid anymore," she whispered. Hallie stepped forward, placing both hands on Adriana's bare waist. "I'm not running anymore." And then she kissed her. No hesitation. No fear. Just fire. Just truth. Their mouths crashed together in a kiss that was not gentle, but desperate and deep and filled with everything they'd both survived. Hallie pushed Adriana back against a tree, hands roaming, lips biting, gasps turning to groans. It wasn't about lust. It was about release, about claiming the bodies they'd fought to keep, the love they'd nearly lost, the future they refused to live in silence. Adriana kissed her back like she was never going to let her go. And when they finally pulled apart, foreheads pressed together, hearts pounding, Hallie whispered, "I never thought I'd want to be seen again." Adriana smiled, brushing her knuckles along Hallie's cheek. "Then let me be the one who sees everything." Hallie closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of pine and sweat and love. "You already are." Beneath them, the valley slept. But above, the moon burned like it had been waiting all this time for this moment. Two women no longer hiding, no longer haunted. Just wild. Just whole. The forest still echoed with their steps. The moonlight still clung to Hallie's skin. But morning came fast, and with it, the weight of everything they'd just survived. In the quiet after victory, there's a strange stillness, like the world holds its breath to see what you'll do next. Hallie felt it in her bones. The spirits were gone, the ancestors silenced, but their presence had left something behind. Her. Changed. Claimed. Complete. The fire under her skin had cooled, but it hadn't vanished. It pulsed in her blood, curled at her fingertips, and hummed in her voice whenever she spoke. Adriana noticed it too. Her eyes followed Hallie now with something different, less protectiveness, more awe. Hallie wasn't a woman she needed to shield. She was a force she stood beside. And the world was watching. News of what happened in the glade had already spread. Not just to allies, but to enemies. Not just to wolves, but to witches. The balance had shifted. The queen's mate was no longer a question mark. She was a statement. And statements were dangerous. "There's unrest in the council," Adriana said as they stood by the frost-dusted windows of the bookstore that morning. "Some of the elders are saying I'm too close to you, that I'm blinded. By love."
Hallie asked.
Adriana nodded once. "By power. They think you've changed me." Hallie turned to face her. "Have I?" Adriana didn't answer right away. Then, yes. But not in the way they fear. Hallie stepped closer, her voice low. "Then let them fear me. I'm not going to dim, so they feel safer." Adriana caught her hand, pressed it to her chest. "I don't want you to. I want them to burn for underestimating you." The tension that followed wasn't between them. It wrapped around them like smoke. Outside, a raven circled the sky. Not a bird. A message. The seal attached to its leg bore the mark of the High Witch's Circle. Hallie took the scroll from its claw, and the raven disappeared in a shimmer of black mist. Adriana leaned in to read over her shoulder. Hallie unrolled it slowly. The parchment was cold, the ink sharp. To Hallie of the Silver Moon Line, your presence has awakened dormant bloodlines and drawn eyes long turned away. Some will want to silence you. We do not. But you must understand what it means to carry both magic and the wild. You are not the first, but you may be the last. We summon you to the sanctuary. 1 week's time. Come alone. Or not at all. Hallie stared at the words. Her chest tightened. They want to see if I'm a threat. You are, Adriana said.
To them.
To their order. To everything they've spent centuries controlling. Hallie looked up. Do you want me to go? Adriana hesitated. I want to protect you, but I know you won't let me if it means standing in your way. You're right, Hallie said, but I don't want to walk into another trap. Then we make it their mistake to underestimate you. That night, while Adriana met with her captains, Hallie walked through town alone. The cold bit at her cheeks. The people she passed no longer looked away. They nodded. A few even whispered her name, not in fear, but in reverence. But there were others too, watching from windows, from corners, from the edges of belonging. She felt their eyes, their doubt, their resentment. You don't get to be powerful without becoming a target. The next morning, Hallie walked into the war room at Adriana's estate, a former monastery built of stone and strategy. Maps covered the walls. Guards straightened when she entered. Adriana stood near the hearth, her arms crossed, her jaw tight. There's a traitor in my circle. Hallie didn't flinch. Who? Not sure yet. But they've been feeding information to Leora. Coordinated movement. Weak spots in our outer defenses. Rumors about you. Exaggerated ones. Hallie raised a brow. What kind? That your power is contagious. That your bond with me is a spell, not love. That you're planning to overthrow me. Hallie's laugh was sharp. I don't want your crown. Adriana's eyes softened. I know that, but they don't. And that makes them dangerous. Then we flush them out.
How?
By doing exactly what they're afraid of, Hallie said. By standing together. Publicly. Again. That evening, Adriana made a speech in the center of the town, standing atop the stone steps outside the hall. She spoke of alliances, of threats, of unity. And when she reached for Hallie's hand and pulled her up beside her, the crowd gasped. Not because it was shocking, but because it was confirmation. The queen's mate wasn't a symbol. She was a shield.
A sword.
A woman of voice and fury. Hallie spoke too. Not long. Just enough. I'm not a queen, she said, her voice clear, but I carry the blood of women who survived when silence was a sentence. If you think I will let anyone strip that from me again, you haven't been paying attention. Later that night, when they returned to their room, Adriana took her face in her hands and said, You were born for this. Hallie leaned in and whispered, I was born to find you. And then they kissed like the world might end. Because it might. The next morning, Adriana's beta delivered the worst news yet. We found the traitor.
Who? Adriana asked. Talus.
One of your guards. Hallie's blood went cold. She was in the woods the night I fought the shadows. The beta nodded. And now she's disappeared. We believe she's gone to Leora. Adriana's hands clenched. We're being set up. For what? Hallie asked. The beta looked at her. For a war we won't see coming. For a betrayal from the inside. Hallie turned to Adriana. Then we don't wait. We go to the witch's sanctuary. We find out what they know. We find out who I really am. Adriana looked at her, something unreadable in her eyes. And if they try to keep you? Hallie smiled. Then they'll find out what it means to try and cage a storm. The journey to the witch's sanctuary began before dawn, when the mist still clung to the earth like breath that refused to vanish. Hallie stood at the edge of the trail, a satchel slung over her shoulder, her cloak lined with runes, and the pendant her mother left swinging like a heartbeat against her chest. Adriana stood in front of her, her jaw set, her eyes unreadable under the gray sky. "You're not going alone," she said. "You can't." "I have to," Hallie answered, brushing her knuckles along Adriana's cheek. "They won't open the gates if I bring anyone. This is their law." "Their law doesn't protect you." "Neither does waiting," Hallie said. "But if anything happens, I need you to hold Elkridge. Hold us. I need to know we're protected." Adriana exhaled sharply, her shoulders tense. "I hate this." Hallie smiled softly. "I know, but you trust me." "I trust you. I don't trust them." "Good," Hallie said. "Then you'll be ready if they try anything." She leaned in and kissed Adriana, slow and full of promise. Then she turned and walked into the forest alone. The path to the sanctuary was not marked by signs or symbols. It was marked by memory, by bloodline, by invitation. The trees thickened as she walked, the light above her dimming, not with time, but with enchantment. She passed through veils of mist that tasted like sage and salt, through fields where nothing grew except white flowers that shimmered when touched. Her magic stirred with every step, not rising in warning, but humming in recognition. The sanctuary did not appear, it unfolded. A cliffside temple hidden between two mountains, carved from ancient stone, surrounded by waterfalls that moved in unnatural silence. At the gate stood two witches in robes woven with gold thread and obsidian beads. They did not speak. They did not question. They simply turned and let her in. The inside was hollow and grand, a cathedral built into rock, its walls pulsing faintly with magic, so old it felt like it breathed. There were no guards, no chains, just presence, eyes watching from every shadow. Hallie followed the path until it opened into a circular chamber lit by floating crystal orbs, each one containing a flickering memory. In the center stood a woman with silver-white hair braided into a crown. Her robe was deep blue, her skin like sun-warmed stone, her expression unreadable. "You are Hallie," the woman said, not asking. "Yes. Daughter of Chorus, granddaughter of Elareth. You carry the wolf and the wind." "I carry myself," Hallie corrected. The woman smiled slightly. "Spoken like your mother." She gestured to the seat across from her. "Sit." Hallie sat, spine straight, palms steady. "Why did you call me?" "Because you've crossed a threshold. Power like yours has not awakened in over a century. And when it did then, it was dangerous." "To whom?" Hallie asked. "To the balance." "You mean to the control?" The woman tilted her head. "You don't fear us." "I've faced worse than words and robes." The other witches stepped forward now. 6 in total, forming a circle around her. One, with copper curls and storm-gray eyes, spoke next. "The bond with the Alpha Queen has complicated things." "Complicated what?" Hallie asked. "Your evolution," another added. "When power awakens, it either roots or rots. The bond you share ties your magic to her. It dilutes it." "No," Hallie said, her voice firm. "It strengthens it." "Emotion clouds clarity," the silver-haired leader replied. "Your love makes you vulnerable. My love makes me anchored." "Then choose," the elder said. "Stay here. Train. Ascend. Become what you were meant to be." Hallie's breath caught. "And if I refuse?" "Then you must sever the bond." Silence dropped like a blade. "You want me to break my bond with Adriana? If you stay with her, your power will always be half. Your legacy will remain earthbound. But if you release her, you will become legend." Hallie stood. "I didn't come here to become legend. I came here to understand what I am." "And now you know," the woman said. "You are rare. You are singular. You are dangerous. And you are being hunted because of all of it. Then let them hunt me. But I won't become like you, cut off, cold, alone." "Love is not the enemy," another witch said. "But it is a distraction." "To you maybe," Hallie said. "But my bond with Adriana is the only reason I survived." You were not summoned to speak romance, the elder snapped. You were summoned to decide. Then I decide, Hallie said, stepping back from the circle. I choose her. I choose us. Whatever comes with it. The orbs above dimmed. The room pulsed once, magic heavy, dissatisfied. You have turned your back on your ascension.
No, Hallie said.
I've turned my back on your rules. The elder stepped forward, eyes narrowed. Then the protection of the sanctuary is no longer yours. You leave here with no shield. Then I'll be my own shield. Hallie turned and walked out. She didn't run.
She didn't hide.
She felt the spells fade from her skin like warmth bleeding out into the cold. She felt the magic of the sanctuary recoil, pushing her out. But her voice remained. Her power remained. Because it was hers, not theirs. She emerged from the forest after nightfall, her cloak torn, her heart steady. Adriana was waiting. She didn't speak, just grabbed Hallie by the shoulders and pulled her into her arms. Hallie let out a shaky breath against her neck. They gave me a choice. I know, Adriana whispered. You chose me. Every time. They held each other like something holy. And above them, the moon rose full again, not judging, witnessing. The wind had changed. Hallie could feel it in the marrow of her bones, like a string pulled tight just beneath her skin. The air carried more than autumn's chill. It carried tension. Unspeakable. Heavy. Inevitable. Word of her choice had reached even the farthest corners of the continent faster than any raven could fly. The sanctuary had stayed silent, but silence was its own kind of answer. Everyone knew. Hallie had turned her back on ascension, refused the golden path of legacy, and instead chosen love, chosen Adriana. Some called her foolish. Others called her dangerous. But all of them had started watching her differently. Especially Leora. She hadn't shown herself publicly since the gathering. Not a single threat, not a whisper of movement. But that kind of stillness wasn't peace, it was calculation. And Hallie knew it. Adriana did too. That morning, Hallie stood at the large window of the Alpha Queen's estate, watching the wind tug at the last golden leaves. Her reflection stared back at her, steadier than it had ever been. Power hummed faintly beneath her skin, not like a storm anymore, but like a current she'd learned to live with. Not tame, just owned. Behind her, Adriana entered the room with measured steps, a sealed letter in hand. It's from Leora. Hallie turned, instantly alert. What does she want? Adriana handed over the letter without speaking. Hallie unfolded it carefully. The paper smelled faintly of lavender and rot. The handwriting was fluid, mockingly elegant. To the Queen and her chosen silence, you've made your love very loud. Let's see how loud it stays when fire comes for it. You're invited to parley. Neutral ground. 1 week. You know the place. Come alone, or don't come at all. Hallie folded the letter again. She's baiting us. Of course she is, Adriana said. But she wouldn't risk an open move unless she had something to offer, or someone to threaten. Hallie's voice dropped. Talus. The traitor who had vanished. Who knew their movements, their defenses, their patterns. She's alive, Adriana said. We confirmed it. Captured. Being used. Hallie's fingers curled into fists. She's drawing us in. Using the one thing she thinks we can't ignore. She's right, Adriana said. We can't. The meeting location was an abandoned fortress carved into a hillside, once a seat of power for mountain packs, now buried in ivy and forgotten oaths. Hallie had been there once, long ago, as a child. It was where her mother had first told her, your silence can protect you. Now, she would return with a different truth. Your voice can burn empires. Adriana and Hallie didn't go alone. They brought a small circle of trusted guards, wolves and witches alike, hidden in the perimeter. They made no dramatic entrance, no declaration. They walked through the dead vines like ghosts returning to where they had once been buried. Leora waited in the courtyard, draped in black, a thin smile stretched across her lips. Behind her knelt Talus, bloodied, barely conscious, Magic suppressors locked around her wrists. "You came," Leora said. "I'm honored." Adriana stepped forward. "Release her." "Of course," Leora said, gesturing lazily. One of her guards stepped forward to unlock the cuffs, but not fully. The moment the restraints loosened, Talus screamed. Not words. Magic. Her body convulsed as light surged through the cuffs, an enchantment, a trap, something dark designed to destroy. Hallie reacted instantly. Her hands flared with magic, burning through the space between them, slicing the restraints from Talus's wrists in a flash of gold and blue. The impact knocked Hallie to her knees. Adriana caught her before she hit the ground. "It's a message," Hallie gasped. "She wanted to show us. She doesn't need to kill us herself. She just needs to make us choose." "And what have you chosen?" Leora asked, her voice carrying like poisoned silk. "To come here.
To show your soft underbelly.
To save a traitor who gave you away." Hallie stood, slow but steady. "We're not here because we're weak. We're here because we don't abandon our people. Even the ones who betrayed you?" "Especially them," Hallie said. "Because mercy doesn't make us foolish. It makes us stronger than you." Leora's eyes narrowed. "You'll regret that." "Maybe," Adriana said, her voice like steel. "But not today." Hallie extended her magic again, wrapping it gently around Talus, lifting her unconscious form into the air and into the arms of a waiting guard. Then she stepped forward, toe-to-toe with Leora. "You want war?" she asked quietly. "Start it. But know this, if you touch what's mine again, I won't come back with words. I'll come with fire." Leora leaned in, smirking. "Then burn." Hallie didn't flinch. "I already did. And I survived." The queen and her mate turned and walked away without another word. They didn't run. They didn't look back. And that was what frightened Leora most. That these two women, bound by something deeper than ambition, weren't posturing. They weren't performing. They were becoming. Back at the estate, Talus was taken to the infirmary under tight guard. Hallie stood outside the chamber for a long time, her fingers pressed to the doorframe, her shoulders tense. "You blame her," Adriana said quietly. Hallie didn't look away. "She gave me up, and you still saved her." "Because I had to." Adriana stepped closer. "Because that's who you are." Hallie turned, her face unreadable. "I don't want to be used again, Adriana. Not by anyone. Not by power. Not by memory. Not by love." "Then don't be," Adriana said. "But don't let fear turn you into someone you don't recognize." Hallie met her eyes. "I just keep waiting for something to take you away from me." "Nothing will," Adriana said. "Not politics. Not prophecy. Not Leora. And if they try," she leaned in, "then I will burn with you." Hallie smiled for the first time that day, something fragile but real. "Then let's start the fire." The wind had a taste now. Metallic. Inevitable. Like a storm breathing through the teeth of the mountains, hungry for the moment it would be unleashed. Hallie stood at the edge of the overlook behind Adriana's estate, eyes locked on the horizon as black clouds gathered. But it wasn't rain that approached, it was war. Inside the war room, maps were being unrolled, scouts reporting back, alliances being tested like rope pulled to the point of snapping. The pacts in the north had offered their neutrality, which was a coward's way of waiting to see who would bleed first. The southern witches had sent word that they'd stand with Hallie, but only if she bound herself to their coven's ancestral magic. A leash by another name. Adriana had spent the morning refusing every offer that came with conditions, burning every letter that asked for Hallie's compliance in exchange for support. "They want your power," Adriana said. "But only if they can own it." Hallie didn't look away from the storm. "Then they'll never have it." The sun never rose that day. It simply faded. Light dulled, and the air grew so still the birds stopped singing. Hallie walked barefoot into the forest, not to run, not to escape, but to remember. She traced the edges of her past like a map, the creek where she used to whisper secrets to the moon, the tree roots where she'd buried her voice, the clearing where she'd first kissed the girl who would break her. And then she kept walking.
Deeper. Past memory. Past pain.
Until the trees thinned and the rocks grew sharp and the wind howled names she did not recognize. She was being called. Not by anyone living. By the power she hadn't touched yet. The part of herself that wasn't wolf, wasn't witch, was something older. The ground cracked beneath her feet and revealed a narrow ravine, pulsing with light only she could see. She stepped inside without hesitation. It wasn't a place. It was a memory that had become real. In the center stood a circle of stones, each one etched with runes from a language no tongue spoke anymore. In the middle, a mirror pool, its surface glowing like starlight trapped in water. "You're not ready," a voice said behind her. She turned. A woman stood there. Not a spirit. Not a hallucination. Herself, but older. Wilder. Wearing her face and none of her fear. "Who are you?" Hallie asked. "Who you'll become. If you survive." "If you don't tame storms," the other Hallie said. "You become one. Or you're destroyed by it." "What is this place?" "This is where our bloodline was born. Before wolves. Before witches. Before names." "Why now?" "Because the war you're walking into won't be one with teeth or spells. It'll be one with truth. And you haven't spoken yours yet." "I have. Not all of it." Hallie stepped forward. "Then show me." The woman smiled. "Step into the pool." Hallie did. The water didn't ripple, it opened. She sank, not into wetness, but into memory. Her mother giving birth in silence. Her grandmother burning letters she was never allowed to read. Her great-grandmother screaming during a ritual no one finished. Her lineage was not just pain, it was a choice. Over and over again, women choosing silence to survive. But Hallie wasn't surviving anymore. She was becoming. She rose from the pool breathless, her body humming with something sharp and clean and ancient. Her eyes burned silver. Her veins pulsed with lightning. She wasn't just a hybrid. She was a convergence. The woman was gone. But her voice remained. "Now you know." Hallie returned to the estate just before nightfall. Adriana met her at the door, breath caught in her throat at the sight of her. "Something changed," she whispered. "Everything did," Hallie said. "I touched the beginning. And it didn't break me." Hallie walked into the war room, and every eye turned. Not out of respect. Out of instinct.
She didn't speak. She didn't need to.
Her presence had shifted. Something in her magic now hummed at a higher frequency.
Wild.
Uncontainable. When she touched the table, the maps curled slightly, like the paper recognized her as something that could command wind, flame, storm. "What happened?" one of Adriana's generals asked. "I remembered who I am," Hallie said. "And it's time everyone else does too." That night, an unexpected ally arrived. Camber Vale, High Witch of the Broken Vale Coven. A former rival. Known for her brutal magic and political indifference. She entered with no guards, no grand gestures, only a single sentence. "I saw your echo on the wind," she said to Hallie. "And I've come to fight beside you." "Why?" Adriana asked. Camber looked at Hallie. "Because she's not just a woman. Not just a witch. Not just a wolf. She's the first of something new. And if she wins, we all do." Adriana's jaw tensed. "Or if she dies?" Camber's smile was grim. "Then we all burn." Hallie didn't flinch. "Then we don't lose." The room fell silent. Outside, the storm finally reached them. Thunder cracked like bones snapping. But it wasn't chaos anymore. It was rhythm. A drumbeat. A calling. A warning. Hallie stood in front of the window, hair whipping in the wind, eyes glowing silver. "She's going to strike soon," Adriana said. "She thinks we're still waiting." "We're not," Hallie said. "We're rising." The storm howled her name. And this time, Hallie held back. The night of the final battle began with silence. Not the kind that comes from fear, but the kind that builds before something ancient is unchained. The clouds were thick, hiding the moon like even the sky knew it wasn't time to watch yet. Inside Adriana's fortress, The air pulsed with magic, strategy, and tension so sharp it felt like it could slice skin. Hallie stood in the center of it all, dressed not in armor, but in runes. Ink burned into her skin like declarations. Her hair was loose, wild. Her eyes still carried the silver glow of the ancestral well.
She didn't pace.
She didn't tremble. She waited because she already knew they would come. And they did. Just before midnight, a scout returned breathless. They're here. Thousands. Witches. Wolves. Warlocks. Leora leads them all. Adriana stepped beside Hallie, their shoulders brushing. She brought everyone. Then we don't hold back, Hallie said. We become. The plan was simple. A coordinated defense around the fortress perimeter. Traps already set in the trees, in the stone, in the roots. But the final confrontation, it would always come down to two women. And one war that had waited centuries. The first wave hit like thunder. Magic cracked the sky open in bursts of violet and fire. Wolves tore through the outer field, met by Adriana's soldiers in brutal clashes of fang and claw. Hallie stood at the front gate, unmoved, hands glowing, hair lifting in the wind. Her power stretched in a wide arc of invisible pressure, holding back the deadliest spells, shielding the wounded, pulling fallen witches back from death's edge. But she wasn't here to be a wall. She was here to be a storm. Leora finally stepped through the chaos, unscathed, smiling, dressed in black layered with red, her crown twisted like thorns. So, she said, her voice echoing, the girl who went silent now wants to be heard? Hallie didn't blink. I was never silent. I was listening. To what? Leora mocked. Ghosts? Lovers? Lies. To the part of me you were always afraid of. Leora laughed. You think love made you strong? It made you weak. You could have been a goddess. No, Hallie said, stepping forward. I became whole. And then she attacked. Not with fury, not with vengeance, but with the calm power of a woman who knows who she is. Her magic wasn't cast. It sang, moving like poetry made fire. Leora met her in full force, and the battlefield around them scattered as the two forces collided. Lightning carved through stone. Spells cracked the air open. Wolves circled, watching. Witches gasped as the ground trembled with every blow. Hallie held her own more than that. She pushed Leora back. Again. And again. But the older witch was clever. Pull. She twisted her magic into illusions, creating images of Hallie's worst memories, her ex's betrayal, her mother's silence, the day she lost her voice. Hallie faltered. Just for a second. And Leora struck. A blast of dark fire hit Hallie in the chest, throwing her back into the dirt. Blood filled her mouth. The world tilted. Adriana screamed her name. Leora lifted her hand for the killing blow. And Hallie howled. The sound tore through the night like a blade. It wasn't human. It wasn't wolf. It was everything. Every scream she had swallowed. Every word she had never been allowed to say. Every truth. The battlefield froze. The fire around her didn't consume. It shifted, glowing gold and silver. Hallie stood again. Broken. Bleeding. Becoming. You want silence? She said, voice echoing through every bone of every creature present. Then let me end yours. She raised both hands, and the runes on her arms lit like constellations. The air buckled. Leora tried to counter, but it was too late. Hallie's magic didn't strike her. It unmade her. Layer by layer, illusion by illusion, lie by lie, until only the core remained. A woman who had once been a girl terrified of losing control. You don't need to die, Hallie whispered. You just need to stop. Leora fell to her knees, her magic ripped from her like breath. And then silence. But not fear.
Peace.
The rest of the army dropped their weapons. Some wept. Some howled. But none dared step forward. Adriana ran to Hallie, catching her before she collapsed. You did it, she breathed. Hallie looked at her, pain flickering behind her eyes. We did. They stood together as dawn broke, casting golden light over a battlefield that now bloomed with wildflowers where magic had scarred the earth. Later, Howl stood before the remaining leaders, witches, wolves, ex-allies of Leora, each waiting for a demand, a new reign, a claim to power. Howl simply said, "I don't want a throne. I want a future. One where no one is silenced to survive. If you want to build that with me, stay. If not, go." No one left. In the days that followed, rebuilding began. Treaties were signed. Covenants rewritten. Wolves and witches shared space, shared leadership, shared healing. Howl and Adriana returned to the forest one evening, to the cliff where they'd once run under the moon. As it rose full and silver above them, they shifted, two wolves racing side by side through trees that no longer whispered warnings, but sang blessings. And when they reached the clearing, they shifted back, breathless and laughing, naked under the stars. Howl turned, her heart full, her voice steady. "I was afraid I would lose myself if I loved you." Adriana smiled, brushing a lock of hair from Howl's cheek. "And I found myself instead." And then they kissed, deep, burning, raw, under the full moon, not as women recovering from war, but as women rewriting the world they'd inherited. The wind no longer carried fear. It carried the sound of Howl's name, spoken not in silence, but in reverence.